by the scholars of Islam, the jurists of Islam. This is not something that they introduced. This is not something that they came up with. This is something that the Prophet ﷺ taught with regards to the essence of categorizing knowledge, right? So he tells us, ﷺ, for instance, بُنِيَ الْإِسْلَامُ عَلَى خَمْسٍ. Islam has been built upon 5 pillars. This here is how the Prophet ﷺ taught and categorized knowledge in the minds of the companions radiallahu anhu. So we have pillars, we have conditions, we have obligations, and then we have stuff that is extra. Things that if they are absent, if they're not there, they don't necessarily invalidate the worship, but if they are present, they exaggerate the reward of the worship. And we spoke about this categorization many times before. We mentioned the 4 levels of any act of worship. We have conditions, we have pillars, we have obligations, and we have sunnah, right? Anything that is part of an act of worship, we have to be able to categorize it into one of these 4 categories so that we know what the ruling is when that thing is missing. So when the Prophet ﷺ would teach the companions, he would teach them to do something. He would say, do it like you see me do it, right? So for instance, in the narration of Malik ibn al-Huwayrith in Bukhari, صَلُّوا كَمَا رَأَيْتُمُونِي أُصَلِّي. Pray just as you see me pray. That is the basis of learning. Everything that you see the Prophet do, you do it. Anything that you don't see him do, you don't do it unless otherwise instructed. Right? Very simple. But the position of the jurists, the scholars of Islam, is someone comes and says, well, this particular thing that the Prophet used to do, I didn't do it. I forgot it. I didn't know about it, etc. What is the ruling on that form of worship? What is it? Is it invalid? Do you have to do it over? Do you have to do something else to compensate? Or is it something that doesn't affect that worship? This is why we have this categorization. This categorization of something is obligatory or something is mustahab. Many of us have heard this before. Something is wajib, obligatory, or mustahab, preferable, or something is makruh, it is disliked, dispraised, or something is haram, it is forbidden. This categorization is not how the companions used to receive the commands of Allah and His Messenger. We don't receive them on the basis of, do I have to do this? O Messenger of Allah, will Allah burn me in hell if I don't do this? Otherwise, I'm not going to do it. That's not the basis of receiving the message. We do this in order to know where our standing is if this thing is missing. It's something that we have to understand. The essence of receiving the message is whatever Allah says, we do. Whatever He doesn't say, we don't do. Very simple. But when it comes to the stage of life, someone can't do something, or someone can only do something partially, or someone is learning. Should we dump all the knowledge on them all at once, or should we have priorities? That we teach this before we teach this, right? So in order for that process to take place, the scholars were taught this categorization. That which is wajib, that which is mustahab, that which is mubah, that which is makruh, that which is haram, that which is a pillar, that which is a condition. Something is obligatory, something is mustahab, right? That's the purpose and that's the function of that categorization that the scholars use, and they learn that again from the Prophet ﷺ. So we look at salah. Salah has conditions. It has 9 conditions. It has 14 pillars. What are the conditions? We say making wudu is a condition of prayer, right? No wudu is going to be accepted without, no prayer is going to be accepted without wudu. This is a condition. Someone comes and says, I didn't make wudu. Is my prayer valid? We said, no. You have to make wudu and remake prayer, right? That's the ruling. So, based on this, as Ramadan is approaching, we have to understand what are the conditions of fasting? What are the pillars of fasting? What makes a fast valid and what makes it invalid? What is the bare minimum and what is the maximum that we should all drive for, right? Ramadan, fasting the month of Ramadan, it has 5 conditions. These are conditions, right? If this criteria is met, you are obligated to fast. That's what that means. When these conditions are met, Ramadan is now binding for that person to fast. What are those conditions? The first condition, and most of us know these things, the first condition is Islam. Islam, a person has to be Muslim, right? For their fasting to be valid. Now, does this mean that non-Muslims are not obligated to fast? The answer is, of course. When Allah speaks, His creatures are obligated. It's not just obligations for the Muslims. The non-Muslims are obligated with the same obligations that Muslims are. However, a person must be Muslim in order for their fasting to be accepted. If a person is an idolater, a person is Christian or Jewish, and they say, well, you know, I'm going to fast too, that's fine to do that, but that fast would not be valid because all actions have to be based on the foundation of Islam. The second condition of fasting is al-aql. Al-aql means that a person is sane. Sane. What is sane? We hear this a lot, right, from the scholars. We hear this from the Prophet ﷺ. There has to be a line where a person crosses that line from sanity to insanity. There may be people closer to that line than others, right? But what is the line? What is the defining line between sane and insane when the Prophet speaks about it? Not clinically, not by doctor's standards, right? Not someone who has an anger issue or someone who sees things or so. This is not necessarily what insanity is. What is insanity and what is sanity? What is the line in the sand between the two? I'll tell you. When the Prophet ﷺ mentions sanity, what he is speaking about is the ability to grasp reality in order to have an intention. That is what sanity is. That a person can grasp reality well enough to be able to hold a coherent intention. That is the line between sanity and insanity. Let's say a person has completely lost his mind, right? And he sees people making wudu and he goes and sits down and does whatever they're doing. Is this person fit for them to be obligated by the obligations of Islam? We say no, because he doesn't understand what he's doing. This is a purely physical exercise for that person. When we say a person is sane, this means that they are able to hold a coherent intention. Right? That is the line between sanity and insanity. The third condition is al-bulugh, that a person is of pubescent age. They reach the age of puberty. The age of puberty is defined by 3 things. Any one of these 3 things happens first, this person is now considered to be an adult Maybe not culturally, maybe not societally, they're not an adult. They might be very immature. But puberty is a process that happens in the body and a process that happens in the brain, which has symptoms to it that articulate that this mind is of the age where this child can now understand the difference between right and wrong and the difference between action and consequence. That's what's important. Maturity isn't the issue here. The issue is puberty. And what does puberty look like? Well, puberty is defined by one of three things. Number one, the child starts to grow pubic hair or hair in the underarms. This means that this child has now reached the age of puberty. Number two, the child has what is called al-ihtilam. This was a name coined by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Al-ihtilam is that the child is capable or has had what is referred to as a wet dream, that the child is now of sexual age. This articulates that puberty has been reached. Or the third, that the child reaches the age of 15. One of these three things happens. So let's say a child doesn't have the wet dream, doesn't have the growing of pubic hair, but they reach the age of 15, because everyone is considered to be of age once they reach the age of 15 years old, right? For females, there's one extra, and that is that she would have her menstrual cycle. If a female has her menstrual cycle, she is now of age. What does that mean to us? What does that mean when a child is of age? It means that they are held responsible for everything that an adult is held responsible for with regards to the obligations and prohibitions of Islam. And now we see how damaging it is for us to continue to baby and coddle our children. They reach the age of puberty and they're still in their mind 6 or 7 years old. This is a disservice to the child, right? Now, when we say puberty, does that mean that only a person of a pubescent age can fast? No. A child who is able to hold an intention is able to be rewarded by Allah for Hajj, for fasting, for prayer, for anything. But when are they held responsible? At the age of puberty. All right? The fourth condition for fasting is that a person be a resident. What is a resident? A resident is opposite of a traveler. Person is opposite of a traveler. A person can only be one or the other. They are either a resident, they're at home, or they're a traveler. They're not in their hometown. Travel is dictated by whatever people consider to be travel. It doesn't matter how far it is, and it doesn't matter how long it takes. I could hypothetically jump on a plane right now and be across the world in a couple hours. Does that mean that it is not travel? No, it is travel. I could also hypothetically travel for days, right? On foot or something, and not have strayed very far from where I'm from. It's not dictated by distance. I know in some of the madahib, they mention 80 kilometers. But this doesn't mean that at 81 kilometers, you shorten your prayer and break your fast, and at 79 kilometers, you are not allowed to shorten your prayer or break your fast. All right? That is a different situation that we can talk about at another time. But the point is that when a person is traveling, they have the permissibility to break their fast. They can fast, they cannot fast. Who is obligated to fast? Person who is traveling. What about when a person comes back from fast in the middle of the day? What about when a person is going to go fasting? Those are questions that I hope you ask me so that we can get to them, right? The fifth and final, and then we'll take any questions that there are. The fifth and final condition is that a person is of health. A person is of health. What does that mean, health? Health is the opposite of sickness. And illness does not have to be something that is extreme. It could be an illness that is very temporary. It could be an illness that is incidental, right? So for instance, the Tabi'een, they spoke about one of the types of illnesses that allow a person to break his fast is headache. This is one of the illnesses that a person, if they get that during the day, the Salaf, the Tabi'een, the companions, radiallahu anhum, they would view that as a valid excuse to break their fast. The illness doesn't have to be life-threatening, doesn't have to be. What is meant by illness is that the illness will be increased by fasting, or the person's recovery will be delayed by fasting, or they are unable to take some kind of medication, right? Those are the three things. If I get sick during the day or something happens, if I fast, it increases my sickness, this person can break his fast. If I fast and it delays my recovery, I can break my fast. If I get sick and the fasting itself doesn't affect the sickness, but I have to take some kind of medicine, then I can break my fast. However, it doesn't mean that you have to break your fast. It means that you have the allowance. So these are 5 conditions. The 6th, which is particular to females, these 5 including that a woman is not in a state of menstruation or postpartum bleeding, which is after childbirth. These are the conditions for fasting. You have these conditions, you're obligated to fast. You don't meet these conditions, you can fast. But it depends what the reward will be or what the permissibility will be. So, having said that, do we have any questions about fasting and so forth? We'll take a few questions, inshallah. Yes, sir.
The headache.
Headache, yes.
Is continuous headache or?
You know, this is a surprise to a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
Because I've met people that get blinding headaches, especially the first day of fasting, for
4
instance,
days, yeah.
right? Does that mean that a person can break his fast? Yes, it is a legitimate form of illness that allows a person to break his fast. Now, what we mean when we say headache, we're speaking about a headache that can be relieved by breaking your fast. If a person just has migraines and his fasting doesn't affect his headache, he's going to get it either way, then this person would continue fasting. However, if a person gets a headache during the day of fasting, and it is enough for that person to consider to break his fast, it is a legitimate excuse for breaking one's fast, yes. There are some people that have migraines. For instance, I have migraines, very terrible migraines, right? And as soon as that migraine starts to peep out at me a little bit, I have to break my fast. If I don't, I'll be in pain for 2-3 days, right? That's an extreme form of headache. However, other types of headache, just a regular headache, this will constitute a person breaking his fast. Now, what about if that headache is caused because of some kind of addiction? That's a different story now, right? A person is used to smoking all the time, right? If he doesn't smoke cigarettes or whatever, he's going to get a headache. No, this person has to fast, right? That's a different situation.
Coffee.
Right? Coffee is, is a type of addiction. So it is the natural element of purging the body. So that's a natural reaction to the fasting. If a person breaks his fast because of a caffeine headache, He's just going to have to repeat the same thing the next day,
Exactly. That's
right?
what I mean. Yeah.
That's not what we're speaking about. What the companions, the tabi'een, they didn't have caffeine back then. They didn't use these things. Tea was the first form of caffeine that they used, and that wasn't discovered till way later. And that is something that is particular to the process of fasting, which means I fast from these things, and part of that fasting is the consequence of a headache because of it, right? Does that mean that I'm always impaired and I'm unable to fast? No, you have to fast that, because that's part of the process of fasting, right? Allahu Akbar. Yes?
Yeah, so a couple of questions. First, let's say that your doctor says, you shouldn't fast.
Right.
However, you feel okay in that situation and can you fast, that's one. Second, let's say that you don't fast because of illness or whatnot. Do you have to can you pay someone else to fast on your behalf? Is that allowed?
Very good question. So we have two questions for those who didn't hear. Number one, if a doctor advises his patient not to fast, may the person still fast? We'll say it like this. It is haram to fast if it hurts your body, right? Hurts your body like in a permanent way, or in a way that will increase a sickness and illness that will take you to the brink of death, or take you to some kind of unconsciousness or whatever. This is not permissible for a person to fast. If fasting positively harms this person's body, it is not permissible to fast for that person. However, if a doctor advises, hey, you shouldn't fast, it's going to wreak havoc on your cholesterol and on your this and that and blah, 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 and all these numbers, this person has the choice. Some of the scholars mention that it has to be at least 2, and some mention 3 doctors who are trustworthy and all agree, right? If a person has a legitimate medical professional that is trustworthy and tells him, if you fast, it will harm your body, then it is not permissible for this person to fast. If it is, you should not fast, they have a choice because they have an illness, and this illness, if it is either increased or recovery is delayed, or they have some medication to take, then they have an exception. They're allowed to break their fast. A person who is sick can fast if he wants to, as long as it doesn't hurt the body. If a person his sickness is increased by fasting, it is not permissible for that person to fast, right? The second question was, how does a person deal with missing their fast if they were sick, right? This is a very important point. I want everybody to listen really closely to this. There's 2 types of illness, 2 types. You have chronic illness. This is what is referred to by the fuqaha as al-marad al-muzmin. Muzmin means that it has no end in sight. It's just a condition, right? The second is a temporary illness, something that has a solution or something that will go away, right? Let's give an example. Let's say a person has, Allah musta'an, they have some kind of cancer, they have some kind of, some kind of disease that will never go away. There's no cure for it, there's only treatment for it, right? And if this person fasts, it's going to increase his illness. This person breaks his fast and pays what is referred to in the Quran as the kafara. The kafara is the expiation. And the expiation, as Allah mentions, is to feed 1 poor person for each day that the person misses, right? The companions did this in different ways. Some of them would feed 1 poor person, and what's meant by feed them is a full meal, right? 1 average meal from that place and time that will fill them. Some of the companions would feed a poor person each day during the days that they miss. Whilst others, like Anas ibn Malik, when he got really old, he would wait till the end of the month is finished in Shawwal. Then he would gather 30 poor people, one for each day that he missed, and he would feed them all at the same time. Either one is permissible. Now in some masajid, they'll have like a box, right? And they'll say like, this is the expiation box. And they'll say the kafara is $10, right? Yeah, that's all well and good, $10. But the kafara has to reach a poor person in the form of a meal. It cannot be, here's somebody on the street, let me give them 10 bucks and I'm good. That is not considered to be a valid kafara. A kafara has to reach the end person as food. That will constitute a full meal for each day that the person misses. Now, certain masajid, they pay attention to this. So when they have that box that says this is a kafara, you put your $10 in it, that will later translate to food that will be fed to poor people for each day. And each meal is worth about $10. That is what we're looking for, right? However, for it just to be money that reaches a person, this is not acceptable as a kafara. The companions had money. They had money in their time, right? They had gold, they had silver, they had food. But Allah specifically said it has to be a meal. It has to reach the end. It'am, right? It'am means to feed. It has to be food. That is the kafara for each day that a person misses. The essence of the kafara is that it's supposed to be in the neighborhood that you live in. We're supposed to take care of the poor people around us. Can I send it over to India? Can I send it to, Palestine for the poor people of Gaza, etc.? Yes, you can. This is permissible as long as it reaches a poor person as food. However, we start with what is nearest to us in zakat and in kafara. The person who is fed has to be a Muslim in the correct opinion of the scholar, the opinion of the scholars, the fuqaha. Now that's for an illness that is chronic. It's muzmin. It's not going away. There's no end in sight, right? What about a person who has a temporary illness? Temporary illness, all they have to do is make the days up when they're better. That's it, right? Say somebody gets a flu, it's real bad. They need to drink liquids and etc., etc. Can they break their fast? Yes, they break their fast. And once they're better, they just make those days up after Ramadan is concluded. It can be any day of the year as long as those days are made up before the next Ramadan. Right? So the question again was, if someone breaks his fast due to illness, how does he expiate that? We say it depends on the illness. If the illness is something that is extended, then the person pays the kafara or feeds a poor person. If the illness is temporary, then they merely make it up. They cannot do the kafara. Now, if we understand that, we can now take other instances where a person breaks his fast, and we can say what they do. So for instance, a woman does not fast during the days of Ramadan because of her menstrual cycle. How does she fix that? We say, well, when we look at illness, we're not saying menstruation is an illness, but we're saying that the companions, radiallahu anhum, in the law of Islam, we do what is called qiyas. This is like this. That is something which is a temporary reason to break the fast. Therefore, if it is a temporary reason to break the fast, what do we do to make it up? We just make the day up. Same thing with traveling, right? What about old age? Is a person ever going to get younger again? Is that ever going to happen? We wish it will not happen, right? So that is more similar to what? A chronic disease. They have a situation where when a person reaches a decrepit age where fasting is difficult for them, Then they pay the kafara, as the companions did, radiyallahu anhu. What about if a woman has her postpartum that can last up to 40 days, but not beyond, but it can be less? She merely makes those days up. Well, what about if she's breastfeeding? We say then she can do the kafara if more than one Ramadan passes by. Because sometimes a woman will be in the situation where she's pregnant, so she breaks her fast. Then she's breastfeeding, so she breaks her fast. Then she's pregnant, so she breaks her fast. Then she's breastfeeding, she breaks her fast. I had a woman come to me once that had 8 years worth of Ramadan. So what should I do? You're not going to fast 8 months. That is not even a punishment in Islam, right? She would pay the kafara, because this is more similar to what? Al-marad al-muzmin, a chronic illness, a chronic or a permanent allowance for a person to break his fast, right? Yes.
Yeah, just a follow-up question. You know, in my situation, for example, my doctor said, okay, wait for at least 1 or 2 years.
Okay.
You know, before you can start fasting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, does it make it permanent or temporary?
No, it's permanent. That's a good question. What you're really asking is, what is the defining line between temporary and permanent? The defining line is more than 1 Ramadan passes, right? So if I have to break my fast this Ramadan, and I know next Ramadan I'm also going to break my fast, then I pay the kafara, because more than 1 Ramadan is passed. Because making up your fasting should be something that is possible within the year. If it's not, then this is considered to be permanent. All right? Now. Yes, sir.
So condition is you have to be healthy, not sick. So is kafara for old age and chronic sickness is mandatory or is it optional?
No, the kafara is mandatory. The kafara is mandatory. If a person is not able to fast because of sickness or because of old age or because of, that person must pay the kafara, because fasting was originally obligatory upon him, but it was lifted as an exception. The exception to fasting is paying the kafara. And it's really interesting how Allah teaches us this, because in the early stages of Islam, when Ramadan was first obligated, it used to be optional. A lot of people don't know that. It used to be optional. It used to be you can either fast or you can feed a poor person for every day that you miss. That's what it used to be. Then later, in the next year of Ramadan, it became obligatory upon everyone able to. And the kafara took the place only for those unable to fast. So when a person is of old age or a person is of chronic illness, if they are of the financial standing that they can pay the kafara, or they can do the kafara, feed a poor person, they must. That is binding, that is wajib. Yes. Any other questions? Yes.
It's only specific to fasting, or the Ramadan is?
What's that?
It's only specific to fasting, or it can be Ramadan in general?
Ramadan?
Yeah, the question is no.
Oh, it can be anything, whatever.
Yeah, my question is,
preferably Ramadan.
we've been hearing these three, like Ramadan is divided into 3 phases. The first day is mercy, the second
That's
day
a good question,
forgiveness,
yes.
and third is forgiveness from safeguarding from hellfire. We've
Right.
been hearing this. Is there any evidence to prove that isn't the whole year of not just Ramadan, we have to do this?
So this narration was collected in some of the books of Masanid. It's a type of book of hadith, that the Prophet ﷺ said the first 10 days or the first third of Ramadan is mercy, and the second third is forgiveness, and the third is emancipation from the hellfire. This is one of the most prolific, commonplace narrations in the world. And it is also one of the most weakest chains of narration in the world. It is categorically not an authentic narration. It is agreed upon amongst the scholars of hadith to be a weak narration. And thankfully so. Because all of Ramadan is forgiveness, and all of Ramadan is pardon, and all of Ramadan is emancipation from the hellfire. It increases in reward at the end of Ramadan in the last 10 nights. But with regards to the days of Ramadan, they are all equally an opportunity for forgiveness and pardon and emancipation. But this narration, dividing Ramadan into thirds, is a weak and inauthentic narration. No. Anything else?
Yes.
Maybe get your questions together for next week as well. Yes, sir? Take
This
one
is-
last question.
This is maybe
Before I
it's
leave
not
through the
happening
window.
these days, but you're saying about old person, right? Old person who
Mhm.
maybe he can't fast, right?
Right,
He's supposed to do the kafara.
right.
How about if he's poor, he has no money?
Then he receives the kafara. Right? A
Like he can-
person,
yeah.
it's happened where a man had to pay the kafara. Sahih Muslim. Abu Hurairah narrates, a man had to pay the kafara, and he told the Prophet ﷺ, I don't have anything to pay the kafara with. I'm the poorest person in Medina.
Okay.
And the Prophet ﷺ didn't tell him to do anything. Khalas, it is lifted. However, if the person in the future receives money, do they have to do the kafara for years past? This is a difference of opinion amongst the scholars.
Okay.
The correct opinion is yes. In the future, if he
Okay.
became wealthy, he would have to pay for past kafara. But as long as he is unable to pay, there's nothing upon him.
Okay.
Now,
Sheikh,
Yes.
can his children pay on his behalf?
yes, children can pay on behalf of their parent. The caretaker can pay on behalf of others. Any one person can pay on behalf of the other. But it is obligatory upon the individual who misses the days of fasting. Same question, does a husband have to pay for his wife if she doesn't fast? Difference of opinion amongst the scholars. The correct opinion is that it is taken from the person and not necessarily the household. Therefore, it is not necessarily binding upon him. And if she doesn't have the money to pay for the kafara, she's relieved. She doesn't have to pay anything. However, most of the time, yes, they do. They take that over. No. Well, yeah. Okay, we'll stop there tonight. Next week,
It's about Tarawih.
prepare your questions next week. We got to talk a little bit more about fasting
Tarawih.
and Taraweeh. I'm going to have people asking, can I brush my teeth when I'm fasting? Some people don't brush their teeth the whole Ramadan. Please brush your teeth. We'll talk about this next week, inshallah.